Vayomer Adonai ra'ora iti et onia mi asher b'Mitzrayim.
Thou hast covered thyself with a cloud, so that no prayer can pass through. A cloud without rain is a proverbial saying, denoting a man who does not keep his promise. A cloud is the figure of that which is transitory. A bright cloud is a symbolical seat of the divine presence. Jehovah came down upon Sinai in a cloud, and the cloud filled the court around the tabernacle in the wilderness, so that Moses could not enter it. At the dedication of the temple also, the cloud filled the house of the Lord. Thus, in like manner, when Christ comes a second time, he is described as coming in the clouds. False teachers are likened unto clouds, carried about with a tempest. The infirmities of old age, which come one after another, are compared by Solomon to clouds, returning after the rain. The blotting out of sins is like the sudden disappearance of threatening clouds from the sky. Cloud, the pillar of, was the glory cloud which indicated God's presence, leading the ransomed people through the wilderness. His pillar preceded the people as they marched, resting on the ark. By night, it became a pillar of fire. The cloud of theophany. In the Song of Deborah, there is a depiction of the appearance of Adonai in the thunderstorm. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. He made darkness his secret place. His pavilion round about him were dark waters and the clouds of the skies. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud, and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof as the color of amber, out of the midst fire. Like the bow in a cloud on a rainy day, such was the appearance of the splendor all around. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And thou sayest, how doth God know? Can he judge through the dark cloud? Thick clouds are a covering to him, that he seeth not, and he walketh in the circuit of heaven.
Sakota ba'anan lach, ma'abor tefillah. You have screened yourself in that cloud of yours, so no prayer could pass through.
In the tightly woven triple acrostic strophes of the third chapter of Lamentations, we hear an intensification of the poet-collector's attempt at ordering a world, inner and outer, that is dissolving into chaos and violence. At the chiastic center of chapter 3, and indeed of the book as a whole, there resides an intellectual essay about God, referring to him in the third person and emphasizing abstract concepts like infinity, omnipotence, goodness, and justice. The wisdom tradition tries to hold the center in verses 40 to 42 as the people examine their culpability and lift their hearts and hands toward the heavens in supplication. Then comes the sucker punch and direct address. You have not forgiven. The psalmic strophe, verses 43 to 45, continues the second person address of the voice of the suffering people directly to Adonai. You have screened yourself off, pursued and killed us, have made us disgusting filth. You, Lord, our sovereign God, how could you? One can imagine the words being spit out, and at the center of this strophe we hear an almost spiteful parody of God's presence as the protective, sheltering, enlightening cloud of the Exodus covenant. This mood is conveyed in Berlin's translation. You have screened yourself in that cloud of yours so no prayer could pass through. The use of second-person address shifts the discussion into immediacy and intimacy. Things heat up here. Despite the accusations, the relationship is gut-wrenchingly real, no mere intellectual exercise, but a national lament. A strong parallelism within these verses, but not across the alphabetic division, highlights the distance between we and you. The God of the old Deuteronomist covenant is gone. In what Berlin terms a masterfully ironic allusion, the poet reinterprets a major religious principle about divine immanence. The cloud of presence and theophany in Exodus accounts now covers rather than reveals. Just as she or he created an anti-psalm in the first verses of chapter 3, inverting the image of the Lord as a good shepherd, here again the poet-collector is illustrating that the old order will not hold. Berlin asserts that these verses constitute a theological turning point. Clearly, deeply cherished religious convictions are being obliterated. God refuses to be present, yet the people do not disengage. They cry out in outrage, but one can easily imagine the Geber shaking his fist at that damnable cloud. Interpretive questions surface. Is the cloud obscuring a God who is present but refusing to listen due to some fault of the people? Is God present and silence God's most articulate and compassionate response? Or has God disappeared altogether behind a cloud? These questions cannot be decisively answered, and both Berlin and O'Connor believe we are left at a place of theological impasse. Cuellar would suggest that the failure of the old rhetorical order is birthing a new system of expression, turning syntax on its head. God refuses to cooperate with the terms of the Old Covenant. It's a war of the rhetorical worlds. God will not be possessed or controlled, not by the people, not by the Geber, not even by the poet-collector. The story remains jagged, unfinished, and God unpossessed. The people suffer under a cloud.
You enshrouded yourself in cloud. Prayer may not pass through. There's surprisingly little commentary on verse 44 of Lamentations, where God is accused of blocking out prayers. Most likely, this is because people either don't want to think about it or don't know what to think about it. Candy Queen Sutherland says that naming God as the enemy, or even worse, preaching the silence of God in the face of unthinkable suffering, borders on religious suicide. Those scholars that do directly address God's rejection of prayer seems to fall into two interpretive camps. Those that say it only seems like God isn't listening, and those that say the prayers aren't going through because they're not right. Both William Kelly and John Calvin belong to the second group, although their reasoning differs slightly. According to Kelly, a saint should not seek a deprecation of a chastening, and if they do, it were a mercy that it should not be heard. He believes it to be wrong to ask for a lessening of punishment, and therefore God's silence is merciful. Calvin, on the other hand, believes that the barrier does not come from God, but from ourselves. God promises to hear our prayers. Therefore, Calvin concludes that the Jews did not pray aright, that they had closed up against themselves every access by which God could admit them. Both of these interpretations presume that there is a proper way to pray, and that only those who follow the correct formula will be heard by God. This severely limits our access to God, and it silences those who do not pray properly. It undermines our confidence in being in relation with God. The other reaction to this verse is that God's rejection is only our subjective perspective of the experience. Silence does not have to mean a distant or unreachable God. The closest attention may be the most silent. God may be helping us most effectually in silence, unperceived by us. This silences the voices of pain. It discounts their experiences of abandonment and invalidates their perspective. Queen Sutherland also seems to agree that silence is a healing response, but only partially. She believes that grief needs its silent watchers. Lament needs silence. People need the space to be able to find words and grieve, but they shouldn't have to do it in isolation. However, she does not seem to find God fulfilling the role of silent watcher, but rather as an oppressor. In Lamentations, God is mentioned, invoked, harassed, and accused, but God is conspicuously absent. While she does not specifically call God the oppressor of Israel, she does imply it. Being able to name the enemy is the only way to gain power over oppression and injustice. It is only when the oppressor is named correctly that the oppression can be overcome. This interpretation silences the oppressor, whoever that oppressor is. All power and voice are given to the oppressed. It is they who must speak out if change is to happen.
The clouds have obscured the prayers of the people from God is not entirely new. When he came down on Mount Sinai, God used opaqueness to hide himself. These clouds were thick and heavy and blocked the prayers of the people, and was God's way of saying, "Talk to the hand." This is not a phenomenon found only in the Bible. It exists in technology today, as certain radio frequencies have trouble penetrating cloud cover. Twice humanity created our own cloud, obscuring the sun and raining down enough radiation to destroy 2 cities. Today, some countries have the capacity to create a cloud so dense and lethal that God might turn away from humanity altogether. We often lament that God is not listening to our prayers. Victims of the Holocaust didn't feel they were being heard. Throughout the multiple tragedies in Africa during the 20th century, people felt they were not heard. The occlusion of God in the world today is most often of society's creation. Cynicism and mistrust have taken hold and are clouds created in response to the misdeeds and fanaticism, including some other religious groups. Even God would have difficulty obscuring himself to the degree that religion has accomplished. How often are those with disabilities not heard, not by God, but by humanity? Laws had to be passed just so they could gain access, because society would not see or hear. In schools today, children are called stupid because no one wants to see or hear those with learning struggles. How often do victims of domestic violence feel they are not being heard, not only by God, but also by law enforcement, the courts, neighbors, even pastors? How often do we obscure from our sight and our ears the cries of the people around us? How often are abused children not heard? Bullied children scream in silence till they explode, either internally or externally. Often God is used as the scapegoat for not saving those who were praying, asking, crying, or screaming for help. Yes, we blame God for not hearing when we ourselves obscure the sights and sounds. When we have the opportunity to be the hands and feet and serve humanity in the way we are taught, do we? We are the ones who need to remove the opacity that we use to obscure those around us.
When she read those words from the Bible and in her sermon, they were spoken in a calm voice, a voice that has not been forsaken in a long time. My God, why have you forsaken me? When those words echoed in my head, they were spoken in a voice full of grief and despair. My God, why have you forsaken me? When those words echoed in my head, they were spoken in a voice broken with emotion and cracked with loneliness. My God, why have you forsaken me? When those words echoed in my head, my soul shouted them at the heavens, but the stars were too far away, and if anyone heard, no one answered. My God, why have you forsaken me?